As I have watched the events of the last weeks and months unfold in Ferguson and beyond, my heart has been broken open. I have wondered how one might address this situation, both on a personal and a public level, and I have at turns felt like so many of us in the congregation, so many of you who have shared your thoughts and experience with me, at turns overwhelmed, shut down, angry. Today, I want to offer some words of hope, at least words about how I have begun to think and feel about these issues. I recognize that here in this congregation, we will be in many different places. And my wish today is to offer some thoughts that might be a companion to your own journey, not necessarily a reflection of your own thoughts. If you wanted a reflection of your own thoughts, you could have stayed home and looked in the mirror, right? Reinhold Niebuhr, the same theologian who penned what has come to be known as the Serenity Prayer, once said the following: "Fanatic orthodoxy is never rooted in faith, but instead in doubt. It is when we are not sure that we become doubly sure." The idea of this quotation is that whenever we are uncertain of a situation, whenever we are unsure, one instinct is to double down on what we are sure of. It is the instinct to bolster our certainty in the midst of uncertainty. And I think it makes sense in some ways when we do this, when we find something concrete to hold on to in what otherwise seems like an overwhelming mess, we at least have some touchstone in that situation. Blog posts, Facebook updates, news commentaries, the list of writings in the wake of Ferguson have proven this again and again. On one website, an article picked apart the fairly sparse report on the shooting of Michael Brown and was able to extrapolate, and I quote, that the information there proves that Officer Wilson's version of the events that day are true. The problem, of course, is that that was only an autopsy report, and autopsy reports do not prove how events transpired. It can suggest likelihoods, but it cannot definitively show what happened the night Michael Brown was shot. The words of the St. Louis City Medical Examiner Michael Graham are helpful here. He writes, "As you look at this autopsy report, people are grabbing onto one thing and trying to make a whole case on one particular detail of the finding. You just can't do that. Instead," he says, "the case is more nuanced, and it does not hinge on a single detail in a medical report. It is also about issues that are broader than the specifics of the case, questions of race and prejudice and fair treatment that are not limited to what happened in Ferguson." And yet, because there is complexity, because there is uncertainty, Niebuhr's words ring true. People are acting doubly certain. This fact or that fact proves it. They will argue and double down. The way that the autopsy report is being treated is a symptom of a wider cultural trend. The public theologian Chris Glaser sees the problem of double certainty express itself commonly and prolifically in our culture. He writes that in our current context, standing up for yourself has turned into standing your ground, which sanctifies self-righteousness and the inability to see nuance or complexity. When we see our limited perspective as the righteous one, as the only true one, and we see our ground as the holy ground, the only holy ground, there's little room for discussion about how to move forward together. Standing your ground clouds out any ability to see an issue more broadly, to admit that your ground might not contain the whole truth. Glaser writes, I personally experienced this recently while discussing a New York Times article speculating if Officer Wilson could have performed his duties in such a way as to create a different outcome. A lawyer on ABC News unequivocally rejected that anything he might have done could have avoided the tragedy. Now, writes Glaser, in our litigious and gotcha culture, I understand that self-doubt and uncertainty become indicators of guilt or malfeasance. But if I had done something that ended in someone's death, no matter the circumstances, I would have been racked with guilt and doubt, wondering what I could have done to avoid or prevent that. But when Glaser tried to communicate this thought, this idea to a friend, his friend told him simply that he needed to stop maligning Darren Wilson and other officers. Glaser's more nuanced view could not be heard or perceived. Now, I have to wonder if this lack of curiosity, this doubling down into certainty, isn't about something larger than the case in Ferguson. This doubling down of certainty seems to cut us off from any thoughtful understanding of racism in our country, how race has operated historically and how it operates today, its historical legacy, and its current forms. Indeed, getting caught up in minutiae from reports and getting entrenched in specifics from the case seems to me a way of avoiding the feeling of discomfort provoked by issues of race. Indeed, if we stand our ground on the details, we can avoid the pain of the larger issue. It makes sense because working with the issue of race can feel defeating and overwhelming. This is where I think Reinhold Niebuhr's prayer, which forms the title of this sermon, might provide something of an antidote. The prayer goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. These words offer the possibility of release, of not having all of the answers, of living with elements of uncertainty that no single person can necessarily change. Breathe, it says. You don't have to have all of the answers in this moment. We do need to find the courage to chart the best course forward, but we can only do that when we accept that there is a lot about the world that we, as individuals, are not going to change in this 24-hour period. The truth is that I do not have all of the answers for the issues provoked by Ferguson. That would be one hell of a sermon, and it would probably take several days. And it would have to be done by a preacher better than me. I feel that the best I can do is name and accept some of the truths about the situation and humbly reflect upon what I can do to make a meaningful difference. I would like to name a few of the truths as I see them before moving on to some possible solutions. First, there is the truth that there is a well-documented, statistically proven, active legacy of racism in our country. African American people are unjustly targeted by police. This is especially true in Ferguson, but it is also true across the United States. The Atlantic magazine reports that in 2013, the Ferguson Police Department made 5,384 stops and 611 searches. 86% of the stops and 92% of the searches were of black people. 92% of the searches were of black people. Only 67% of the town's population is black. More largely, in a report made by ProPublica, it says that black men are 21 times more likely to be fired upon by police than are white men. 21 times more likely. This truth makes me cautious of claims that we live in some sort of post-racial utopia and that these are issues that don't need to be addressed. It also encourages me to find ways to discover solidarity rather than distance from those who are outraged, angry, who are protesting. Second, there is the truth that historical forces go beyond Ferguson or any other particular case in this country. Darren Wilson is caught up in historical dynamics that far exceed his making. While this does not exonerate his actions, it also gives me more humility than to declare that his actions are evil or even intentionally racist. Rather, I believe that the issue is bigger than just him. This truth reminds me that we need a response to the problem of racism in America, not only to the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson. Third, there is a personal truth that is appropriate for me to name in this context, the truth that I do not have the same experience of someone who is African American. That is an embodied reality that is not a part of my experience. And because of this, I feel doubly committed to trying to be empathetic and understanding in this situation. It is a part of my privilege, my white privilege, to ignore the problem or to dismiss it, to pretend that it isn't there. If I want to begin to move beyond my limited range of perceiving, I need to reach out beyond my experience. I need to listen to the stories of others who have experienced this sort of discrimination and feel what those experiences are before I make any kind of determination about what I think should or should not be done in this situation. This truth helps me recommit to seeing, feeling, and acting upon the racism and the injustice that I witness in our world. Now, my spiritual companions, it's easy to feel overwhelmed when we are confronted with these complicated dynamics. I know that I do. How am I going to change historical realities or statistics or massive social injustices? Niebuhr's prayer might be a good place to start. We start by admitting that there is a lot that we cannot change. A lot of this pre-exists us, and a lot of it will go on after us. We cannot solve it all. Now, this may sound like defeatism, but I actually think this reality is the best place to start. When we begin by feeling crushed by historical or social dynamics, we are likely to retreat into something like apathy. The best response in that case is to shrug our shoulders with the thought that it sure would be nice if someone would fix that problem, someone meaning not us. When we begin by accepting the things that we cannot change, on the other hand, we can then use our energy to change the things that we can. In September, our Social Justice Coordinating Committee held a forum to address racism and what we can do to make a difference. I was inspired to listen to the various ways that people have combated racism and found solutions. One member, Joyce, talked about how one can raise a non-racist child. Lois shared her experience of being an ally at a company that she worked for, while Sally and Jocelyn shared an article with 12 concrete ideas that white allies can do now in the wake of Ferguson. I'm going to repost that article on our Facebook page, and you are welcome to read it over and reflect upon it. Now, the Serenity Prayer is not often thought about as a solution to social or political problems. To some, this might seem like a stretch or a strange way to talk about the prayer. But I'm reminded that Niebuhr himself was a political theologian, and he never saw his faith as separate from the social struggles of the day. Indeed, Martin Luther King Jr. drew deep inspiration from his thought as he was working in Selma and beyond. Niebuhr believed that it was through deeply encountering this world that we can live our lives more courageously and faithfully. As he puts it, our spiritual task is accepting hardships as the pathway to peace. Accepting hardships fully, not pushing them away, not pretending that they're something that they're not, accepting those hardships as the pathway to peace, starting there and then finding the courage to change what we can. My spiritual companions, may we find the acceptance and the courage to face those hardships and find a pathway to peace. Amen. I love you, and blessings on your journey.